This is a story that's in Miracle of Love, a book of 1,000 stories about Neem Karoli Baba, who is our meta-guide for the day. It's very interesting that I've been teaching since I came back from India in 1968, teaching my interpretation of Dharma, what I picked up from the East, what I picked up from my inner work, what I picked up from psychedelics. And one of the hardest things for me to convey in the West has been the quality of devotion. When I met Maharaji, which that story is in everywhere, Be Here Now and so on. As many of you know, he blew my mind. He blew my mind by telling me how my mother had died 6 months earlier of spleen in Boston, something he could not know by the way we usually know things. And as a scientist and a psychologist, my mind couldn't handle that situation. And the circuit blew. And I went beyond thought. And at that moment, now that's the part of the miracle part of it that I market in the West. Because the West loves that stuff. But the fact is that what happened a moment later, what happened a moment later was he was about this far from my face, like that, and he was just looking at me. And at that moment, I felt this incredibly violent wrenching in my chest, as if a door was being opened. Some of you that are old enough remember a radio called Inner Sanctum. And they'd open the screeching door before each show. And that's what it felt like, that screeching door open. And I started to cry, and I cried for 2 days. And they took care of me, and they fed me, and I'm not that kind of a person. And I didn't even know why I was crying. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I wasn't crying because I was happy. I was just crying. And it was very bewildering. What I have come to realize in my relationship with Maharaji was that at that moment I was being bathed in a quality of love or presence or total isness that was without judgment. That was without judgment. We bandy about the word unconditional love, but nobody that I know is capable of it. Because it means that you can't want anything, even to stay alive, because I might kill you. Could you love me if I was going to kill you? Unconditional love is unconditional love. It's not dependent on the condition that you do this or don't do this. You love because you are loved because you exist, just like a flower. You love because it is. And what that did in the presence of that love was it went in behind all my paranoid defenses, all my feelings of inadequacy, all my feelings that I'm not enough, that I've got to be good, all that stuff that you and I know so well. And it released something so deep in me. What could I call it? An innocence? Maharaji loved me as I had never been loved before. And what that has left me with, one of the many things it's left me with, is the possibility that that is the gift one human being can give another. That's the transmission. And I think since that time, almost 30 years, my game has been to transform myself in such a way that I become an instrument of that kind of love. Because what other gift to free another person to do what they need to do? It's not my business what you do. That's your karma, not mine. But the question is, what can I do with my mind so it's an environment for you that allows you to become free? What can I do that doesn't feed your entrapment in your identity of who you think you are? The container you've put yourself in with your mind. In other words, we're talking about the path of the heart that takes you out of your mind. Because the problem with mind, and I'm talking about our thinking mind at the moment, because the word mind is beautiful in its many levels. It's like strudel. But the predicament with the thinking mind is that it thinks about things. It takes objects. And so if I think about you, you are one thought away from me. If I think about myself, I am one thought away from me. I and me is one thought apart. And somehow being isolated in my thoughts isn't a good enough way to live life. And one of the many paths, of course, in this wonderful spirit rock creation that's creating itself, is the beautiful techniques of Vipassana meditation, which I have done since 1970, and I continue to do and honor as a groundwork for all of my other spiritual work. Not that it's lower, it is the ground that permeates all my work. But the method also that we're talking about today, the method of the heart, is a way of going beyond the mind, the thinking mind. Now, I want to honor the thinking mind. I mean, I'd be a fool not to. It's got the parachute up here. The thinking mind has all of the wonderful, wonderful, incredible things that make us all live like kings and queens in this culture. But as is often said, the thinking mind is a beautiful servant. It's just a lousy master. And the question is, how do you extricate yourself from that mind? Now, the other thing that I was very reticent to talk about when I came back from India was what is my basic path. My basic path is what is called Guru Kripa. And it just doesn't sell in the West. It's called Grace of the Guru. It means that my path is my relationship to this being. My relationship to Neem Karoli Baba. And in the West, there is a tremendous deep aversion to surrender to another person. And we can list on our fingers and toes, and all of our fingers and toes, all of the examples in which people have surrendered to the wrong person. But a lot of that problem is because the West doesn't really understand the term guru very well. They make it into sort of a glorified teacher. And that isn't really what a guru is, not from my point of view. A guru is like a door frame through which you see truth. The guru is the door frame through which you see truth. So I meet this man, and he loves me unconditionally for a moment. It only took a second, by the way. I mean, this isn't years of practice. This took a second. That's how long transmission takes. He looked at me a second and turned my entire life around again. I mean, mushrooms did it the first time, he did it the second. An honor to Timothy Leary today. Now, there are a lot of people that think my guru was a tremendous rascal. I mean, there are people in the villages that think he was a terrible person. And I saw hundreds of people come by and touch his feet and see him, and nothing happened at all. What is important to me is what happened to me, because that's my gift to you. And what happened to me for whatever karmic reasons. Opened me in such a way that I went from one day thinking, I'm an ex-Harvard professor, I don't touch people's feet. Seeing all this kind of slushy, going to rub his feet and grabbing at his feet and rubbing his legs, and this rather plumpish man with no teeth. And the next day, I was angling for it to get a hand on a foot, to just touch a toe. And when my hand finally got to the point where I was going to do it, he pulled his foot back under a blanket, talking to somebody else all the time. I mean, it was not like he did it to me. It was just, I thought, I'm not pure enough. Isn't that great? I mean, the Jewish guilt was right there, you know, right there at that moment. So I went into this kind of absolute psychosis with a lot of other people. I mean, could we look at him? Could we see him? Could we study his body? Could we rub his hand? Could, you know, you'd bring an apple and he'd throw it at you, hit you right in the crotch. You know? That's deep teaching. But even at the beginning, while I was part of that hysteria of being around him and seeing him and touching him and all of that stuff, I saw through it. I saw that he wasn't it. He was and he wasn't. That what it was that I touched through him. Through him. He was a mirror that was showing to me my own beauty. In India, they say God, Guru, and self are one and the same. He was mirroring something in myself that I knew to be true. And my love towards him just kept growing and growing. So then he dropped his body. He died. He died out from under me. So there was nowhere to go to touch him or look at him or get him to scream at you or tell you to get the hell out of there. Because what he said to me most of the time was jao, which means split. Go. Leave. And then for some years, we gathered the stories that became the book Miracle of Love, which is a great, great book. It's like drinking Courvoisier or something, story by story. And I had pictures of him everywhere. But then something interesting started to happen. The pictures and the stories became pictures and stories. And I sort of put the pictures and stories, I left them there, but I didn't really feed off them. And I began to feed more off his qualities, the quality of rascality, the quality of humor, the quality of emptiness, the quality of equanimity, the quality of joy, all the qualities I'd seen floating through his, the clouds of his being. And I would feel at a certain moment the presence of rascality. That's what it would be like. Just the presence of rascality. Or humor. I'd be in some incredibly important situation, being somebody special with somebody else special. And we'd be being special together. You know how that, you all went into training for it. You know what it's like. You finally met somebody special. How do you do? I'm special. Well, I'm special too. Well, now let's do something really special together, right? And I'm in the middle of all that, and I hear him giggling on my left shoulder. He's just giggling, and it breaks me up. Inside, I don't giggle outward. There are situations you can't giggle in. Like I can't giggle sitting by somebody's deathbed as the death rattle happens, if it happens. It's not a giggling matter, is it? Isn't that interesting? I want to giggle, but I don't think I should. It's not socially appropriate. And then the qualities started to fall away, and I began to just feel his presence. Just like this, just presence. And the presence doesn't have a boundary. So it includes me, includes you, it's just presence. I've played so many games in my relationship with him over the years. I've seen everybody as my guru in drag. Like, who do you think you are? I come up, I'm somebody. I know who, come on. Most of you, or many of you, some of you know my delicious story about the state trooper. When I'm driving along, just stoned out on Krishna, driving across the country, and I see a blue light flashing in my rearview mirror. And I think he's come. But because I'm a child of the 60s or an uncle of the 60s, I know you keep your ground. And it's a state trooper. So I pull over, I'm driving about 30 miles an hour on a thruway. And he says, let me see your license and registration. I'm looking at Krishna, you understand. I've been doing mantra to Krishna for about 4 hours. And I'm just in Krishna land. I'm just keeping enough down to keep the hand on the steering wheel. And I'm going to drive across the country for the next 2 weeks just singing to Krishna and to Ram and to God and to Jesus and to, all of it, all the mishpacha. Just with my mantra and one leg tucked under me and just driving along. He says, license and registration. Sure, you can have anything. I mean, imagine, he came as a carpenter once. Why shouldn't he come as a state trooper? I don't know. So he goes around my car and he calls home and he does all his stuff. And then he comes back and he says, you were going too slowly. And he said, drive on an ancillary road if you're going to go this slow. So I had this very old, beautiful 1938 Buick limousine that I had made into a camper. So at that point, I'm looking at him with the same love Maharaji looked at me. I mean, he can do anything. I just love him. Because I'm seeing Krishna. I mean, this is Krishna in drag. This is my guru. And my guru's making believe he's the state trooper. So if he wants to play, that's fine with me. I'll be the miscreant. We got to have some roles to dance with if we're going to be in form. So whatever it is that happens at that moment, and I can tell you it was a feeling, the state trooper doesn't want to go away. I mean, would you want to go away if you were being looked at with unconditional love? How often is a state trooper looked at with unconditional love, even without his uniform? Nice car you got here. And that allowed me to get out, and we could kick and spit and talk about straight eights and slant sixes and all that kind of wonderful stuff. And they don't make them like they used to, and he can tell me all his old stories, and I tell him all my old stories. I'm willing to go on all day, you know. This is just as great. This is like darshan. And then we run out of that thing. Now, as men in our society, we've used miscreant and state trooper. Now we've used appreciators of old cars. What's left? So he's got to come out from behind the drag now if he's going to go on, you know. So he says, well, be gone with you, which isn't state trooper talk, but we'll let him get away with that, you know. And I get in my car to drive away, and I look in my rearview mirror, and he's standing by his trooper car, waving at me. Now, I leave it up to you. Who was that? Now, in a way, you're starting to get the essence of the devotional quality of this path. Because this path, and the question is, what do you see in another human being? Who do you see another person to be? And here's where I want to introduce the stepladder process of how you use dualism to take you into non-dualism through the heart. Because that's the essence of the Bhakti path. And the word which, even to say it on these hallowed grounds, brings a shock, is the word soul. Because usually it's a no-no within some traditions. I'm going to give you the simplest model that I work with. And I work with it to integrate for myself all the different yogas that I am involved in. Karma yoga, bhakti yoga. I have been hatha yoga in the past. Jnana yoga, dhyan yoga, tantra yoga, raja yoga. And out of all the things I've been studying for 30 years, all the practices, because I'm a practice groupie. I mean, I'm an eclectic dilettante. And all the people that say to me, you got to have one path and follow it. I say, you're right, but here I am. I don't tell you to be like me. I'm a slob. I'm a Sufi, Hindu, Christian, Zoroastrian, Taoist, spiritual, scientific materialist, humanist. And out of all of this stuff that I've been studying and practicing, I've arrived at a very simple model that handles my needs. And it says very simply that when you're born, through a whole set of circumstances, through a lot of socialization and a lot of stuff, you develop a model of reality. And we will call that model ego. And that ego is your map. It's your software for this incarnation. It's who you think you are as a separate entity and what you're doing about it. And who everybody else is in relation to that. That's all ego structure. It involves the fact you think you have a body and what it looks like and feels like. All that stuff's all part of the structure. This is one thing. It's the level in which we are at Spirit Rock, and this seems real. It's a particular dreamscape, but let's have it as real at this moment. At some point, I would probably assume everybody in this room, everybody in this room we awakened, meaning you realize you'd been had, that the model of who you thought you were was just that. It was a model of just who you thought you were, and it was a model of reality. And it was just a model. It wasn't the model. It was just a model. You went from thinking you were living in an absolute reality to realizing that you were living in a relative reality. No big deal. Major change in reality. And if you get close to what's the new paradigm, that's certainly a big part of whatever we mean by new paradigm, new age, all whatever that stuff is about. It's a perspective shift in which you see that reality is not absolute, but it's relative. Now, how do you develop leverage to be able to see how you have been caught, or what the limitations are of what Gurdjieff talks about as the prison of the mind, or the structure that you're in? Well, you need, as Thomas Merton said, you need some place to stand in a river to help somebody else out of the river, otherwise you both drown. So you look for a place to stand. Now, this is a tricky problem when you start to play with Buddhism, because of the concept of anatta. Basically, there is nowhere to stand. So, because there's nowhere to stand, do you have two choices? Either stand in your ego or there's nowhere to stand. Well, what I'm offering you, because I use it, is the middle ground of the soul. The soul is another relative reality. It has to do with karma and reincarnation and all this stuff which doesn't exist. But the soul is some place you can go from which you can see your ego. And you don't have to surrender your separateness. You can still be somebody. You don't have to go into nobody land just yet. It's an in-between place. It's when you're going from here to San Francisco, you will pass the airport. It's an in-between place. So I have started to see, because bhakti or devotional yoga is at the level of soul, basically. It is the way you as a separate entity relate to the totality, to all of it. You're still separate. Even though you may know because of your Buddhist training that it's doomed. It is just a device you're going to use. It's a boat you use to portage across the water, and to go across the water, but you don't portage. You don't carry it on your back when you don't need it anymore, but at first you need it. And most of our work in this lifetime is extricating ourselves from this tremendously overlearned, socialized ego structure that defines who you think you are and what you think the game is about every day. And growing old and marrying and having sex and having desires in your personality, that's all ego trip. Just too heavy? Everybody? I mean, basically, I'm giggling, but we got to do this process, Look at it as, this is all metaphorical. None of it's true. Just look, ego, soul, awareness. That's the third one, awareness. Third one could be called and when we speak about everything we say about it is just the finger pointing at the moon. It's the G-D. It's the no-no. It's the no-name. It's the 1,000 names of Vishnu. It's all the facets that keep pointing you towards that which is beyond facet or embraces all facets. So now look at ego, soul, and awareness as concentric circles. Ego inside who you think you are. Soul, another level of who you are. Karma unfolding is called soul. Soul manifests to work out karma. Soul manifests as egos, as dreams, as egos. It's the way soul does its thing. It's going through a vast time, kalpas and yugas of time, not just, it's the one where Buddha said, do you know how many times you've incarnated? The silk scarf running over the mountain that is, how the mountain is as far as a water buffalo can walk in a day, which is 6 miles by 6 miles by 6 miles, and the scarf runs over the mountain. The bird flies over the mountain once every 100 years with the silk scarf in its beak. In the length of time it takes the silk scarf to wear away the mountain. That's how long you've been doing this. Don't you feel that it's kind of a little repetitious at times? Just allow the possibility that the Buddha wasn't off his rocker with that image, that he was presenting it as a useful image. Isn't that fun? Doesn't it give you a sense of relaxation? Don't you think you've been making more out of this than it's worth? Do you see where the giggle comes from? And so each incarnation, that's a whole incarnation. It's like freeze frame photography. That's the time I was that way. See, they're all whole incarnations. They just... And each round, or over this whole run of things, each time the soul, the awakening happens, the soul, when it happens, that's after the first 60 billion, the soul starts to awaken to its own predicament, that it got caught in its incarnation, and it starts to pull itself back from its incarnation. It's called the witness, it's called mindfulness, it's called whatever label you want to put on it. It is that part of, and there are different levels of it. There's within the mind and then something outside of it. The soul is not in the mind. It's not your thought of your soul, it is soul. And soul is the meta game in which ego is an incarnation or a manifestation. Now what's fun is that as you get to be an older and older being, so that the ego doesn't pull on you so much, so the soul can rest in itself more. First of all, you begin to understand why the ego's trip is the way it is, and you start to have some compassion for it instead of sitting around judging it all the time. Because you're beginning to see how it looks from someplace else and what it was about. You begin to see how suffering is grace. You begin to see the whole thing, which you don't even want to see because it's too horrible. The horrible beauty of it all. Then you begin to hear the whisperings of the return into the pull of God. The beautiful poetry of Kabir, of Rumi, of Hafiz, the Psalms, the beautiful things that describe the yearning of the soul to return into itself, into its. Basically, Maharaji is my soul friend. He is the friend of my soul. He doesn't give a damn about my ego. It's not even kind of interesting to either of us. And I don't want to put it down. I mean, believe me, if you're dealing with being an abused child, enjoy it. I don't want to take away any of your identity that you need. When you're finished with it, here we are. And I say the same thing to somebody dying of AIDS or cancer. I went to visit a woman. She was a Quaker. She was in her 60s in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She invited me to see her, and she said, Ramdas, she said, I'd never met her before, and she excused her husband, and the door closed, and she said, Ramdas, would you help me die? I'm so bored with all this. And I thought about it, I reflected, and I said, I was holding her hand. And I said, well, maybe you're bored because you're busy dying all day. I mean, couldn't you die 10 minutes an hour? You know, think of all the other things you could do in the other 50 minutes. I mean, why do you have to, it's boring. Everybody, you're dying. Here, let me help you, you're dying. I'm dying. You know, it's just a trip. You're dying. I'm dropping my body. I'm selling the Ford. Am I getting the right price? Should I shine it? Should I fix the engine? What about the carburetor knock? Well, oh my God, will they notice? Who are you? I'm selling the car. It's like I'm dying. I mean, once you start, because souls don't die, they just go on, like Frank Sinatra or something. Doing it their way, you know. But egos, that's why they call them dropping the body in India. You don't die, you drop the body. You're finished with it. You don't need it anymore. It's used up. It doesn't matter how old it is. I mean, why complain if you graduate early from 4th grade? He died so young. Lucky him. But I'm not putting down the 4th grade. I mean, it is God made manifest. What do you want? It's just if you get caught in it, it isn't God made manifest. It's a drag. It's a drag. And you and I become satsang or sangha. We become a community of friends. We are soul friends. We are friends that are helping each other awaken out of the illusion that who we thought we were is absolutely real. That's all we're doing. We're not denigrating who we thought we were. It's the ego is an exquisite instrument. Enjoy it, use it. Just don't get lost in it. So you use the soul, and then once the soul is stable, and I am just, now who do I meet? Now what I meet are fellow souls. If I'm an ego trying to become a soul, I meet other egos trying to become souls. In other words, what you meet is the projection of your own level of evolution. And so finally, if I want to help you recognize your soul identity, I damn well better work on myself. Do you hear that link? That's the interesting link. You end up meditating in the meditation hall. You end up doing what you need to do in your practices as your contribution, your compassionate contribution to the universe. Because the more aware you are, the more mindful you are, the more clear you are, the more your heart is open, the more your energies are flowing, the more you are an environment that frees another human being. And what you see when you look at another being is a fellow soul in drag, thinking they're somebody. Now you go in, like I go to the supermarket, I go to the Safeway, and I'm checking out at the Safeway. And it's late, and I'm tired and I'm hungry. And I've got my beads in my hand and my shopping cart loaded. And two people ahead of me is a woman checking out who's got a big order. And when the order gets rung through for 100 and something, the clerk tells her, and she starts to rummage in her voluminous bag for her checkbook. And then she starts to laboriously fill out the check. And then she fills out the checkbook. And I find myself, see, my beads are going faster and faster and faster. And I was going ram, ram, now I'm going ram, 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 ram. You know, why the hell doesn't she, you know. And suddenly I break up. I've been caught. He got me again, far out. Look at how real it became. I mean, like, if I make it home 5 minutes later, and suddenly I fall in love. I mean, there's the beloved. What a gift. You remember that story of the samurai that said to the monk? There was a little monk and a big samurai. He says, "Samurai, monk, teach me about heaven and hell." Teach you? You're dirty? You smell? Your sword is rusty? You call yourself a samurai? Ugh, get out of, I couldn't teach you anything. Nobody talks to a samurai that way. His neck, the blood was rushing into his head. His veins where the arteries were standing out, pulsing. He reached for his sword to kill this impudent monk, and the monk said, "That's hell." And at that moment, the samurai realized that this monk had practically sacrificed his life to teach him that. And he was so overcome with appreciation, and he bowed down, and the monk said, "And that's heaven." Who do you see? Who do you see? The reason I didn't want to tell people about my path of Guru Kripa when I came back from India is I really didn't want to make a lot of people jealous. I mean, what would happen to you if you had something very precious, but first of all, he was dead? And what were you going to do? Make everybody figure, I want what he's got, and then say you can't have it? What kind of a thing is that? And I thought, why should I hurt people that way? So I kind of hid the fact that this was my method. I talked about it in more general terms as Bhakti Yoga. But then an interesting thing happened. In 1978, we put out this Miracle of Love, all these stories about Maharaji. And people bought the book and they started to read it and look at the pictures. And pretty soon, these letters started to trickle in, saying, I don't know who this guy is, but the strangest thing is that I'm beginning to feel like he's hanging out with me. And then they would describe some quality of him or of the feeling they had that in my bones and in my gut I recognized. And I suddenly realized that they were having the darshan. They were having the same thing, that the purity of their heart of opening in this way to these stories, they went like this, and that was the fertile field in which the seed comes, and there was the whole thing was happening. And I began to see that their darshan was just as real as what I was having. And they were suddenly my guru brothers and sisters. Now, there were a lot of people who had been with Maharaji who said, well, these are definitely second-rate people because they weren't with him. Were you with the Lord when he died? To me, my heart said that was nonsense. A living spiritual teacher is a living spiritual teacher. When Ramana Maharshi was dying and everybody said, don't leave us, don't leave us, he said, don't be silly, where could I go? It's like a soul says to a fellow soul, don't leave us. And the soul says, don't be silly, I'm just dropping the body. I'm here. And so I began to see another practice emerging, which is called the practice of the imaginary playmate. See, what I say to people is, look, you can have my method just like I have it. Create a playmate. Use your imagination and create a playmate. Because my guru's dead as your imaginary playmate's going to be. Pick a playmate and imbue the playmate with all the qualities that you would like to have for a friend to hang out with. Qualities of what? Joy? Some wisdom? You'd like nachas? You'd like some wisdom? How about some, you can pepper it with any rascality. I love rascals. How about loving? How about absolutely unyielding? How about totally yielding? I mean, the fun of an imaginary playmate is you can imbue it with whatever you want. And then you hang out with it. Now, the fun of that is that when you end up, the beautiful game of the realization is that the imaginary playmate turns out to be real and you turn out to be imaginary. That's the end product of that method. I mean, that's what I have. I have Maharaji with me all the time, and I'm just saying, hey, Maharaji, what do you think of this? And he's not saying, I think it's... Ugh. You say, well, it's a one-way conversation with your own imagination. Fine, I'll buy that. Why not? Isn't all method imagination? What isn't? You think sitting on a meditation cushion isn't? Don't be silly. Don't be silly. It's all illusion created by illusionists in order to escape from illusion. You don't want to end up a meditator. You want to end up free, for God's sakes. If you want to end up a meditator, we'll wait. I'm a meditator. How do you do? I'm Ramdas. I'm a meditator. I've been meditating since 1902. I was with a woman the other day, and I said to her, who are you? She said, I'm a seeker. I said, have you thought about being a finder? I mean, I can get into the relationship with Maharaji of mea culpa. Poor me, I'm a schnook, I'm caught, you're free, you're wonderful, I love you. But the hell with that. We are two free beings at play, and he's it's like a buddy. It's like a friend. It's like a friend. It's a lover. It's a friend. It's whatever you want to have it. Here's Ram Prasad, 18th century Bengali. Playfully you persuaded me that the bitter fruit of egocentric desire is sweeter than sugar. Greedily I consumed this strange fruit. Its sharp taste remains in my mouth day after day. You drew my soul to the relative plane by the promise of wonderful communion. But this divine play in the mode of separation has been severely disappointing, sings your poet of mystical union. O Kali, the drama of my life was composed and acted out in the blazing summer field of destiny. Now please bring your small child home through the fragrant cool of evening, cradled in your arms, lost in your gaze, disappearing in your love. Now we are at the point where the soul now realizes anatta, where the soul surrenders its sense of separateness in order to be with the beloved. But what we're dealing with in that whole issue is the issue of foreplay and orgasm. Because in foreplay you are separate and your beloved is separate and you are enjoying the exquisite ecstasy of the play, the interplay, the interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh calls about it, the dance of form with form. But always lurking is the moment of orgasm in which the dissolution of form once again into the truth. You can see why reproducing the species is so addictive, can't you? See how close it brings you. And this is the fun part for me. There's a moment when Hanuman is the monkey god that I'm named after. It's the monkey of service. Hanuman has done this incredible feat for Ram. Ram is the name of it's another one of those names. And Ram is incarnated and he's married Sita, and Sita's been stolen away by the bad guy Ravana and taken to Sri Lanka, where he's trying to make it with her. And she won't have anything to do with him, and she's waiting for Ram, who's God, to come and get her. He's God, but he's in drag as Ram. And he can't find her anywhere because he's a man and he's hot and he's looking and he can't find his wife. And Hanuman the monkey, who's taken birth just to do this, says, hey, I'll help you because I really love you. And he goes and finds Sita, who is really a relationship between Sita and Ram, is between wife and husband, between disciple and guru. I mean, it goes both ways, whether it's the goddess worship or the male, it doesn't matter. These are all using the bhakti of relationship between man and woman, between chela and guru, whichever way you want to call it. He has reassured the devotee that God has not forgotten. That's what Hanuman has done. And it's an incredible gift. I mean, that's the gift I'd like to be giving to people. I'd love to be Hanuman. I am Hanuman. That's what we're doing. And so Hanuman is kneeling before Ram, and Ram is so appreciative for what Hanuman has done that he reaches down to lift Hanuman and to bring him into himself. That is, they both will go into pure awareness. And Hanuman uses all of his force to push against God to stay separate. And Ram says, well, what are you doing, you stubborn monkey? And Hanuman says, all I want is to stay separate eternally so that I can worship you. In other words, I want to hang out with my beloved. I don't want to merge with my beloved. But it's the point where there isn't any karma keeping you from the merging other than your own intention to stay separate. That's what the Bodhisattva vow is. That's that reflection of the Bodhisattva vow. And a true bhakti wants to prolong the foreplay. Just once more. Now, this is all giving you the map for what we're going to be doing. There are 9 forms of bhakti. That is, there are different ways that are ways in which you meet God through your heart. And they are determined by your own psychodynamic predilections. That is, from where your ego starts. So that one person, like I get to go to Maharaji, who turns out to be like a good father figure for me. Because that's my Meshuggah business. You have yours. So that some of the forms of loving God are as lover, beloved, like Radha and Krishna, as mother to son, like Mary to Jesus, as friend to friend, like John and Jesus, as Hanuman to Ram, as servant to master. These are the vehicles through which, these are the doorposts through which you go to come into the truth. Now that you understand the 9 different ones, let me just say that for each one, there are different levels of bhakti. So that let's say you start out singing to Ram. Now, I remember once it was 1968, I'd come back from India and all these people started to gather at my father's farm in New Hampshire. Till pretty soon, like a couple of hundred people were coming weekends just to hang out and sing and talk about God. I mean, this is far out. And we'd all be in the barn at night singing, and my father came in and we had been doing Hare Krishna for several hours. He stood there for a little while and he said to me, "Who is this Hare Krishna?" And he said, "It's a nice tune, but don't you have any other songs to sing?" That was great. I mean, it's a nice tune, but what about some other melodies? And I mean, it was a lovely moment because that practice is the practice of taking you up the ladder of emotion. Like you start singing to somebody. Like, I often remember very deeply being with Anandamayi Ma, who was an incredibly great saint in India. She left her body in the mid-80s. I want to just give you a little flavor of who she was. This is the quality of true, of service devotion, of bhakti, of karma yoga. One point she said, "This body has lived with father, mother, husband, and all. This body has served the husband, so you may call it a wife. It has prepared dishes for all, so you could call it a cook. It has done all sorts of scrubbing and menial work, so you could call it a servant. But if you look at the thing from another standpoint, you will realize that this body has served none but God. For when I served my father, mother, husband, and others, I simply considered them as different manifestations of the Almighty and served them as such. When I sat down to prepare food, I did so as if it were a ritual. For the food cooked was, after all, for God. Whatever I did I did in the spirit of divine service. Hence, I was not quite worldly, though always engaged in household activities. I had but one ideal: to serve all as God, to do everything for the sake of God. But that was the soul talking about the way in which she was living out her incarnation. But now look at the part of her that is way beyond all that. At one point, Paramahansa Yogananda said to her, "Ma, tell me something of your life." She said, "Father, there is little to tell. My consciousness has never associated itself with this temporary body. Before I came on this earth, Father, I was the same. I grew into womanhood, but still, I was the same. When the family in which I had been born made arrangements to have this body married, I was the same. And Father, in front of you now, I am the same. And even afterwards, though the dance of creation changes around me, in the hall of eternity, I shall be the same." She's at the microphone and she is singing to Bhagwan, to the beloved. And she sings, Jai Ho Bhagavan, Jai Ho Bhagavan, Jai 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 Bhagavan. And on she goes. Now, when I sing that, I may start singing it from the place of, I'm now going to sing for this group what Anandamayi Ma sang for me in Vrindavan. But as I start, something happens. And pretty soon, the song starts to sing me. There's something that happens in there. And what I'm trying to share with you are these levels of devotion one goes through. One starts out with Krishna or Jesus, loving in a human, relational way another being, for example. Object. I love the Sermon on the Mount. I love Jesus. I love the feeling of the compassion of Jesus. I love the devotion and total commitment of Abraham. I love the wisdom of Chung Tzu. I start out by the relational thing with all the, these are like all the different faces of God, written with markers, magic markers. I start out with the one I love as my doorway through. And when you start to sing like Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, or Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. That's a method. And the method will start you singing, I am singing to something, to the, okay, I'm singing to God. But then as you keep doing it, pretty soon, any model you have in your mind of what you think you're doing becomes boring. I'm getting enlightened. That's a good one. That lasts about 5 minutes. Yeah. I'm going to do it because everybody else is doing it. Watch what happens. Watch your own mind. It's like following your breath. It's a technique for seeing the level of where you are as you slowly surrender into just singing. Just singing. In which you become the very thing you're singing to. It all becomes just process. And you dissolved into the singing. Now there are a lot of you, there are some of you, however many of you there are, for whom this is a delicious opportunity to sing together. And you've just been waiting for me to finish so you could sing. Others of you are saying, well, I don't sing, but I'll watch. I'll watch dispassionately. I'll watch mindfully. See, when I went to study Vipassana, the first few retreats I had with, what's his name, Goenka and Manindra in Bodh Gaya, I used to have a picture of Maharaji under my pillow. You weren't allowed to have that. Goenka would have been very disturbed. However, at night I'd sneak it out for a Bhakti hit. It's like my peanut butter for an oral hit, back into my childhood. But then after a while, I started to do the Vipassana. And this is a lot of what James was talking about. I started to do the Vipassana, and at first it was so dry that I couldn't get away from it fast enough to go get a Bhakti hit, to go sing all night somewhere, or chant, or love, or express love, or look at the love in people. But you don't look at people, you just do this. And it took me quite a while, years of Vipassana, before it started to get so moist. First it's got a little moist. I mean, I try to pump it up with some models about moistness, you know. Look at these wonderful teachers, they're so kind and I love them and I'll give them more dana. That kind of devotion. But I ran through that. But the practice got so moist, so liquidly soft, the heart so filled the space. And yet every experience of the heart was another one to chop up into the purification of samadhi, following the breath. So you don't end up milking the emotions. See, that's what's fun. This is an emotional path that takes off from your emotions and takes you way beyond it. And at first you milk the emotion, I love you, oh, I love you, I want you, and your tears and all that. And then it goes beyond that until you're finally just singing it. And here they are. I think I have a strike on my hands. We're going to have time in the afternoon for questions and answers, by the way. It's not that I'm not responsive to all of our dialogue, but I really wanted to frame the practice for you. I wanted you to hear clearly the way in which devotional yoga works. And as you move from the soul into pure awareness, then like in Nibbana or like in Dzogchen's Rigpa state, you are just So I'm playing with 3 levels: ego, soul, awareness. 3 concentric circles. Ego dies into soul. Soul merges into awareness. Awareness embraces all phenomena. All phenomena arise within awareness, dissolve back into awareness. With anicca, all changing, all phenomena changing. Awareness. Ego, soul, awareness. Soul mates, soul friend, soul, that's what we are for each other. We are here to remind each other of what this is about. We are here to help each other wake up. And if I want to help you wake up, I damn well better be awake. Because everything else is a travesty. Everything else is total, is an act of an ersatz thing that creates suffering. To present yourself as free when you are not is a harsh act. It's as harsh for other people, it's harsh for you too. Because it cuts you off, because you're in your mind. I mean, it's why when I give a lecture, as I have been doing, as you may have noticed over the years, I now introduce it all the time as ROM is an acronym for rent a mouth. That you rented me, you rented my mouth to say back to you what you already know. Because I say it well. And I know you know it because when I say it as deeply and as best I can, you go like this. And how did you know that? And if you knew it already, what did you have to come for? Because we come back again and again and to say it to ourselves so that we can hear it ever more deeply. And it's a service we do, and I am on the path just like you are on the path. When you sing to the beloved, whether it's the mother, Durga or Kali or Tara or Mary or if you sing to Krishna or Jesus or Ram, realize at first, when you're still thinking, that you are, it is as if the part of you that thinks you're singing is singing to the song that you are. It's like the levels of your own being. It's like your ego is singing to awareness, but you are awareness. It's a dialogue within yourself. And as you keep awakening, who you are in that dialogue keeps changing until you are awareness celebrating the manifestation through singing to yourself. Maharaji continually was moving his fingers like this. And if you looked, what he was saying was Ram, 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 Ram. And he kept a diary. Every day he wrote 2 pages in his diary of what happened that day. And if you look at the diary, it's just page after page, book after book of Ram, 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 Ram. He kept a diary of the ongoing events of the day. Now, I don't think he was doing it to get high. I really don't. I think what was a practice for me if I did it was a celebration for him. So I invite you when you're singing to play with all these levels of it. Play with starting out the beloved. And then play with becoming the beloved and singing to itself, and enjoy all the play of your mind around the quality of the heart. And for some of you, I mean, I have a cat, let me tell you. I have a cat named Maya, and I love Maya very deeply. She's an extremely interesting cat. And when she's sitting on my belly, which is the softest place she finds, and purring in my face, she is the beloved that I'm singing to. So whatever it is that turns you on, start with that. In your visualization or your imagery, have your imaginary playmate play with the images of the gods and the goddesses. It's all soul play. It's all illusory, just like this one is. Don't say that's illusory and this is real. That's ego talk. If you say that's real and this is illusory, that's soul talk. Finally, it's all real and it's all illusory. That's awareness.